Let's bring in Jonathan Schanzer, Vice President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. He's also a former terrorism analyst at the Treasury Department. So, Jonathan, you have some insight on what it takes to make a payment like this. So let's just start there, because as you heard from the State Department, they said no big deal. We talked about this. We told the public that there was a settlement happening, and yes, more details are released about how we did it, but it's no big deal. What strikes you about the way that this payment was made to Iran?
Well, hi, Jenna. Good to see you again. Look, I think that when you look at the way this was done, it looks like what we used to call at the Treasury Department bulk cash smuggling. This is essentially stacking dollars on a pallet and moving it in large quantities to illicit actors. You have to remember here that Iran is still a state sponsor of terrorism. The United States did this secretly in an unmarked cargo plane, moving huge amounts of cash because they could not use the formal financial sector. This is the sort of thing that we used to sanction Iran for back when we had Iran sanctions.
So you're saying it's not normal, because a lot of us don't know what happens in the back rooms of the Treasury Department, Jonathan, right? We may think, we watch the movies, like this stuff happens all the time. But what you're saying is not really.
No, I mean, look, if this was a legitimate actor, if we were dealing with any other country, not a state sponsor of terrorism, not a country we were so concerned about nuclear weapons and proliferation, all the things that we've sanctioned it for, we would have been able to move this money through the formal financial sector, through the banking sector. But because they're still a state sponsor of terrorism, because they're still a risk to the formal financial sector, we had to do it this way. And that only underscores how illicit Iran has been and continues to be.
And we still have sanctions on Iran, regardless of the nuclear deal and everything that we have done over the last year with them.
We do. And, you just heard a statement from the State Department. The State Department still considers Iran to be a state sponsor of terrorism, and a prolific one at that, sponsoring Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, radical groups in Iraq and Syria. And so the behavior has not stopped. And, of course, it just looks horrible that we're providing cash to a regime that sponsors terrorism.
What do you say to those that say, well, Iran is using this money, this American taxpayer money, for infrastructure building, for ways to repair their economy? Is there any way to know that is indeed what they're doing with the money?
Well, look, Iran is one of the least transparent countries in the world, and so it will be extremely difficult to prove this. But the one thing that we can point out is that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, otherwise known as the IRGC, which is also a sanctioned terrorist entity here in the United States, controls roughly 40% of Iran's economy. So it means that they're the ones who are going to be getting the construction contracts. They're the ones who are going to be building the bridges and schools, if in fact that's what they're doing. And so the money is going to be trickling down to exactly the wrong people, and that's been part of the flawed agreement that was signed last year.
What about the argument that this money was owed to Iran, that we needed to make this payment, so the timing really doesn't matter because we were going to make the payment anyways?
Sure. Well, there was undeniably a dispute dating back to pre-1979 revolution Iran, where there was an arms purchase that was made, and the United States owed that to the legitimate rulers of Iran, not this regime. But look, the real problem here is the timing, that this was done right as we were negotiating the release of those 4 Americans that were being held hostage by Iran. This certainly looks like ransom. And I have to also add that it really is very frustrating, I think, for many Americans who see that, for example, we're paying ransom to Iran on these 4 individuals. We're doing prisoner swaps with the Taliban, for example, with Bo Bergdahl, and yet at the same time we're not trying to do the same thing with people who are being held hostage by the Islamic State, for example, like Steven Sotloff, who was killed by the Islamic State. I think we have a very confused policy, and one that should be very frustrating to many Americans.
And that's the next step we're going to take with this story about where this could be applied and whether or not it matters if it's official ransom, quote unquote, or whether it looks like ransom and the impact of that. Jonathan, it's great to have you back on the program. Thank you.
Good to see you.